Hi, so this is my journal entry or blog number 3 for how to be an anti-racist. This week, the chapter that stuck out the most to me was behavior, so that's the one that I'm going to be talking about mainly. But I also found a lot of connections in all 3 of these chapters. They all seem to be very closely related and have a lot of the same racist undertones of the way that our society thinks about these 3 things. So it's behavior, culture, and body. And when I was reading these chapters, I found a lot in common with the way that queer bodies and the ever-developing queer culture has become under the same scrutiny for the same reasons. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought I would point that out before I got started with my analysis of the behavior chapter. So on page 97, the quote that stood out to me the most was, "There is a thin line between an anti-racist saying individual Blacks have suffered trauma and a racist saying Blacks are a traumatized people. There is similarly a thin line between an anti-racist saying slavery was debilitating and a racist saying Blacks are a debilitated people." So last semester I took a class. It was Women's Lit 296. So we focused on the narrative of marginalized women. So it was queer women, it was women of color, it was disabled women, women with a disability, however they prefer. And we talked a lot about intergenerational trauma when we were speaking about people of color in particular. So I think we mainly focused on Indigenous women and African American or just Black women. And we talked about the ways in which their parents raised them in particular, and how, so I know for Indigenous women, it's proven that trauma can change your genetics. And so what I know about Indigenous trauma is that often it's changed your genetics, but people use that in such a negative way. White folks will use that in the same way that this quote is saying. There's a thin line between anti-racist saying individual people have suffered trauma and racist saying that this group of people are traumatized people. I found a lot of relation to that in my life. Most of my family lives on the reservation up in the Coudray, and I have never, but my mom did. And so the way that I was raised and the way that she was raised is extremely different. And I've become increasingly aware of that now that I'm 20 years old and I'm an adult. She's more open to talking to me about the way that she lived and how hard it was to find dinner and, things like that. And so I'm aware that my family and my lineage is a lineage that has faced trauma. But what I don't want to hear, which is what he's saying, what I don't want to hear is that my culture is traumatized. Just because of the way that that's so demeaning and condescending of a race, a culture. I thought it was interesting that he brought up Donald Trump, and the way that, that was in culture, the way that Donald Trump could exploit the negative things about a culture or a race, and generalize them the way that trauma has been generalized. So I just thought that was incredibly interesting. I know that I am a culprit of that sometimes. I'll talk to people of a different culture than me, and I kind of come about it almost as if they're completely different. Like, I try to be careful because I understand that they're different, like they were raised differently, and so I try to be sensitive and just not even sensitive, just aware. But when I'm what I don't realize is that when I am aware, I end up stepping on eggshells, and it's noticeable. And my relationships with people that are different than myself, white folks included, is strained. The other thing that I noticed that he talked a little bit about in here was when you bring up your history of trauma in your family, white folks don't know what to do, and so they get defensive. And that's been a general theme in the whole book. But, you know, if I bring up when I was homeless, or I bring up the way that my mom had to go, like, she jokes about it now, but she used to have to go fish for her dinner, you know, because they didn't have anything else in their home. And I bring up those things because they're so, like, natural for me to tell stories like that, because it's my reality. And I end up isolating myself, or maybe the folks that I'm telling are isolating themselves from me. But either way, so I thought that this was a particularly eye-opening chapter, for the way that we can learn how to communicate in the bridge. I think that a lot of the times it's very easily to isolate yourself in the bridge, and I, for one, definitely do isolate myself in the bridge. I am really starting to understand why people of color don't come in the bridge. And, you know, through the culture, body, behavior chapters, that became increasingly clear. Because I have a lot of privilege being a white passing Indigenous student. And so I can walk into the bridge and everybody looks like me, even though, you know, and that line ends then when I hear them speak, because they speak differently than me. But I can walk in and I have the privilege for them to think that I am the same, and therefore they're equal. And I just thought that, I don't know, that's just really opened my eyes to, you know, I always knew that Black populations stayed away from the bridge, and I understood why they would, but I never understood it on the level that he explained it in these chapters. So I think that's the main thing I'm going to take out of this. Thank you.